The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by the Clean Power Consulting Group. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Today on the Clean Power Hour, a just and equitable transition. My guest today is McKenna Dunbar. She is an environmental justice and energy activist in Virginia. I'm so pleased to welcome you to the show, McKenna.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
I was completely floored, to be quite honest, by our first discussion. You have spearheaded so many initiatives and are participating in so much important work in the Southeast and Virginia markets. So I'm just really humbled to have you on the show and see a rising star like yourself in action. So for our listeners, please give us a brief introduction to yourself and how you got interested in energy.
Of course. Again, my name is McKenna Dunbar, and I am the Building Electrification Lead and Community Engagement Coordinator at Sierra Club Virginia chapter. I'm also the founder of Ecological Justice Initiative and the CEO of the newly founded corporation called Mokocono. It's the nexus between social entrepreneurship and community focused on really disrupting the ESG market in a positive way as it relates to corporate social responsibility initiatives. The way that I entered the renewable energy sector is through nonprofits, me being an intern and a volunteer for several nonprofits based here in Virginia focused on bridging the gap between community and the net zero carbon economy. Those organizations are Bridging the Gap in Virginia, Concerned Citizens of Charles City County, and a few other nonprofits as well. I mainly entered this sector in the justice lens, really focusing on grassroots organizing in order to create a more sustainable and equitable world.
So what was the spark? You're a college student still yourself, so you qualify as a young person, but obviously you are now knee deep in this activism for the Sierra Club and several other organizations, some of which you are the co-founder or founder of. And, for me, it was growing up with a dad who was very interested in clean energy. We were doing backyard solar thermal projects, and he was an environmental justice activist for his entire life. What was the contact or the aha moment, so to speak, for you?
I believe the aha moment was me being in touch with my emotions in terms of envisioning climate change and being a Gen Zer in the midst of a great transformation in the environmental sector, in the energy sphere, in the social justice arena, and really feeling upset and disheartened that communities who do not contribute as much to the climate change sphere in terms of the negative ramifications of climate change are the ones who are being most impacted by climate change, who are at the forefront of the negative impacts that climate change brings, being upset by that and really wanting to make a difference in terms of how I can grow as a leader and the skills that I bring to the table in this arena. When I started college, I entered as a biochemistry major because I wanted to work as an attorney in the intellectual property sphere. But after taking a Mesoamerican ethnobotany course and learning about the relationship between humans and the environment around them, and learning more about the morphology of plants, I learned that the environment is important and we need to be able to make sustainable changes, whether it's through ecology, conservation management, business analytics, and carbon accounting and whatnot. And then currently with grassroots organizing and really deeply looking to how the sector can be more equitable and how it can be more resilient as a whole.
So here we are in 2022. There is an amazing confluence of events unfolding before us. the ecosystem is now dominated by human action and activity. Uh, the biomass of humans and our food exceed the biomass of other natural things, mammals, for example, right? We have more pigs and cows than we have other mammals put together on Earth now. We ecologists call this overshoot. And so we have exceeded the carrying capacity of the natural system, and something has to give. And so we are at the beginning of what could be quite a rapid transition away from a very energy intensive economy to one that is much less so. And that's a good thing, but it comes with many, possible changes. And meanwhile, the the industrial civilization that we have built has a very unfortunate habit, right, of dumping on um, the less wealthy, the less educated, and the generally less powerful amongst us. And we call this environmental justice or environmental racism, excuse me. And so those people, meaning low income people, people of color, are disproportionately going to be impacted by this overshoot and eventual rebirth of something different than what we have invented today. And of course, the clean energy transition is one of the solutions to that. And I'm a staunch advocate for the energy transition. But we have to bring everyone along in that transition, right? And make sure that it's not just an economy for the wealthy few or the wealthy elites or the system that created the problems to begin with, pretty much. So, anyway, that being said, the challenges are many and the answers are relatively few. So, what is it that I'm very curious, what is it that you gravitate to as kind of a beacon of hope and a central theme that helps you maintain a positive attitude and balance? Because let's face it, right? It doesn't serve anybody if we get too freaked out about what's going on. We have to trudge forth. We have to put one foot in front of the other. But what is it that you find helps you dig deeper and lean into the transition?
I truly believe the thing and just the theology that grounds me in my work, whether it is professionally, academically, or in my own personal ventures as it relates to the general climate change mitigation sphere, is community, connecting with communities, connecting with fellow people who are involved in the climate change movement, and hearing their perspectives on how we can sustainably change the world, being able to unite as one and hear diverse perspectives, both in background and in thought, really gives me hope for the future, because it is not just me as a single individual facing, the topics that you just talked about, and something that I like to call eco anxiety as a whole. Moving into a future, and a future that has many unknown variables, is quite frightening to many. And it used to be frightening to me and still is in many ways. But the thing that brings me peace and the thing that brings me hope is one and the same. It is connecting with others, whether it's in Virginia, in international communities, virtually, through social media, or in person, forming relationships that are meaningful and that really push thinking forward as it relates to strategizing on how to build coalitions and to build ideas and to work on reports and projects that really increase environmental stewardship and environmental education as a whole. I think that is what really grounds me, and is something that I urge others to start thinking about, even if you're not involved in the direct environmental change for mitigating climate. I think that each of us have a role to play in society as it relates to making our world a more sustainable place, whether that be at home, in industry, as a student, especially as a young student in middle school and elementary school and high school, no matter what education level you're in, no matter if you're in trade school or you're not working right now, each of us have our very own role to play in the climate change mitigation sphere. And it's important to think about where your values align with the general movement as a whole and where you can find consensus and community.
Very well said. So let's explore some of your work. And why don't we just start with Sierra Club? That's certainly an organization that all of my listeners are familiar with on some level, if not have some direct experience with. You are involved in a program around building electrification. What is that program and how does that work unfold in the real world?
Certainly, thank you for asking. Building electrification is both a chapter specific campaign and a national campaign as a whole. Sierra Club is the nation's largest and most influential grassroots environmental organization that focuses on clean air, clean energy, and clean water, and conservation stewardship as a whole for the nation. And the work that I do surrounds building electrification. I lead our campaign here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and our primary focus is integrating efficient and renewable technologies in the building sector as a whole. Our main focus is on integrating solar developments and energy efficiency programs in schools, solar on schools, but we are focused on integrating communities, specifically marginalized low-income communities, as we spoke earlier, and that's where a lot of my work is carried out, but also general environmental education programming, forming partner collaborations with other entities that are focused on the nexus of the net zero carbon economy and community. So a lot of my work surrounds having communications and conversations with individuals like yourself who are pushing for change with the green energy transition. And some of it is writing, doing a lot of writing, doing a lot of education initiatives, also tabling, informing communities and students of building electrification, clean energy, energy burdens, energy efficiency, and adjacent topics.
And why is building electrification so important and how does that work? Because I mean, I understand we're taking, for example, you know, uh, natural gas appliances and replacing them with electric appliances. And we're doing this in the transportation industry as well, of course, converting internal combustion vehicles to electric vehicles. But from your perspective, why is electrification so important?
Electrification fundamentally is the answer to the energy crisis that we as a nation face, but also as a world face. Building electrification in particular focus on commercial, residential buildings reduces the carbon emissions in the second largest carbon emitting sector in the country. It provides for cleaner air for the community as a whole, whether we're talking again residential, solar. It saves money and it really drives us forward, both in a state level and a nation level as a whole, into the great energy transition and improves the quality of lives for marginalized residents and moderate and high income residents as a whole. And in addition to this, environmental justice is a key component to our campaign, and we emphasize this throughout the work that we do. But building electrification specifically combines the fundamental nature of environmental justice with clean energy technologies. And this is why we push for air pollution standards and I'm a part of several working groups working to integrate more EJ, as we call environmental justice, into conversations surrounding building codes and newer adoptions of clean energy standards for the sector.
And in a perfect world, when the Sierra Club's work is quote unquote successful, what is the outcome that you are aiming for?
For the campaign that I lead specifically, the outcome is that public schools across the Commonwealth are getting their energy needs met by renewable energy sources, 100% renewable energy sources coming from solar. That's the fundamental goal. In an ideal world, we don't live in an ideal world, but I would say in addition to that future perspective, I would also say increasing general knowledge about clean energy and integrate education programming in the curriculum of students is another key goal in order to not only inform young children and young people who are going to be the future leaders of our economy and of our nation as a whole, why climate change is such a pertinent issue and the role that each of us play in transforming the world in a better way, in a more sustainable way.
Yeah, it really is such a good for human health to make the transition away from burning fossil fuels, which not only is causing runaway global warming, but killing millions of people a year from particulate pollution, from internal combustion engines and the burning of fossil fuels writ large. So it's it's an amazing opportunity, and we now have the technology. We simply just need to deploy it at scale. Um, so let's talk about the other initiatives that you're involved in: the Ecology Justice Initiative and Mokocono. What are those?
Ecological Justice Initiative is a environmental advocacy-based nonprofit organization that I founded in November of 2020, where I wanted to organize a community focused on students, whether that be high school students, graduate students, undergraduate students, who bring their own skills and passions in the environmental sector into a community that does environmental engagement and environmental research. Our first cohort of interns and fellows brought 12 different students from a variety of majors and passions, from history to engineering to biology and health studies. In 2021, in the fall of 2021, we hosted a clean energy climate change summit at Virginia Commonwealth University with few other nonprofit organizations, with the hope of informing the student community as well as faculty and staff and other residents of Richmond, Virginia as a whole, the needs and desires of different communities and the important metrics that need to be in place in the future if we are going to make a sustainable transition into the net zero carbon economy. We had fellows speak about the disproportionate impacts of climate change on different communities in Richmond and how redlining has shaped the lived experiences of Richmond communities as a whole. We've had an engineering student study General Motors electrification of their fleet and the future of that. And then we've had a biology student study ecology of Florida sugar plantations and the impact on the state as a whole. It was a dynamic group, and that cohort has since landed incredible internships at different environmental organizations and has deepened their own passions and perspectives in the environmental sector. The organization as a whole has transformed since then, and currently EJI, Ecological Justice Initiative, has been supporting a student named Megan Maybe, who is a geography and visual media arts practice major at University of Richmond, pursuing an EPA video grant for a documentary focused on Virginia's first mega landfill in the community of Charles City County, Virginia. So that is on EJI's front. Mokocono is a newly founded company by me that is focused, again, as I mentioned earlier, on disrupting ESG standards in a more sustainable way for CSR, corporate social responsibility spheres, really making sure that community engagement is at the forefront of conversations of climate change in the future, of corporations dealing with the marketing, the development, the financing of different clean energy and environmental justice related and adjacent topics.
Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about some of these eco the eco justice initiative projects. You mentioned mega landfills, and uh, you know, most people have no idea how many landfills there are in America. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of landfills, and they're just a big hole in the ground that is lined with clay and sometimes plastic. It's a bathtub, and then you fill it with municipal solid waste, known as garbage, and you put a cap on it, and you hope that it stays there. And because of the second law of thermodynamics, unfortunately, nothing stays wherever you put it. It falls apart, turns into tinier and tinier pieces, and it spreads into the environment. It affects our drinking water, it affects our air quality, and it's basically a ginormous environmental disaster. We have to still, to this day, figure out what to do with all of our municipal solid waste. And what is going on is counties and cities are closing landfills. They realize that these are environmental bads and they don't want them in their backyards, and residents don't want them in their backyards. And as a result, though, we're getting what you referred to as a mega landfill, these bigger and bigger projects that are generally sited in poor communities that do not have political power. And and so we're concentrating our garbage in these low income communities and rural communities. It's a combination. Um, so, how does this relate to the the circumstances that we find ourselves in, McKenna? Because I do see a direct connection to the consumer economy that we have created, which encourages Americans to accumulate stuff, which we're now filling, uh, in part landfills and storage facilities with, and garages, of course. But what is the solution, if any, in your mind?
I think there are numerous solutions to the topic of landfills, specifically in marginalized low-income communities of color and of other types of marginalized communities across the nation. I believe fundamentally one of them is that we need to consume less as a society if we are supposed to be on track to a net zero carbon economy. We live in such a consumer-focused society due to capitalism, due to the nature of capitalism and how it impacts all of us, no matter if we are consumers or producers, or in the marketing sphere and in product innovation. I believe that, especially over the past 60, 70 years, a lot of new products have come into market, and such products are more based with plastics, and that brings into a whole other conversation of the impacts of microplastics on our health. But fundamentally, what we need to do is buy less and really place measures into the legislative bodies of our nation, whether it's on a federal level or state level or city level, and ask them to prioritize zero waste initiatives ask them to prioritize the clean air and clean water of residents, because one thing that not a lot of people think about for landfills is how does that impact the community closest to the landfills? Where are these communities? Where are these landfills being built in communities, as you were saying? Typically, they're built in low-income communities of color, and not many people think about the health impacts that residents face in this area. And this is why the work that Megan did and is doing presently, working with concerned citizens of Charles County, C5, is imperative in examining the ethnographic as well as the grassroots organizing nature of communities of this sort. Charles City County residents believe that the cancer clusters that they are seeing in their very small rural community is being caused by leachate runoff from the landfills into their drinking water, because they use a well drinking system, many of them do, and the runoff from these landfills are impacting their health, and with them already being burdened with other social inequities such as very low access to data and internet, with having many proposed fossil fuel infrastructures in the area, two of which that they have defeated and are presently defeating more, and just the nature of rural life in the Southeast, as a whole. There's many things that these residents are coming up against, and yet they're still resilient. The ask that they want is for more people to raise their voices surrounding how they can best be supported through policy measures, through intervention, through grassroots organizing, and just how other members of the state can be involved in the fight against corporations who, as they say, are polluting their water and, lowering the quality of life.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Clean Power Hour or viewing it on YouTube. We do have a great YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, please go to cleanpower.group and hit that YouTube icon and subscribe to our channel. Of course, you can find all of our content on your favorite audio platform as well. So please give us a rating and review. Back to the show. There's so many things that we could talk about and so little time. So I do want to spend a little time talking about Mokocono. And you mentioned this ESG initiative. In corporate America, ESG is all the rage. And yet the problems that you and I are so aware of are getting worse. We're not really even scratching the surface on climate change yet. CO2 levels are increasing in the atmosphere, not decreasing. We have 800 gigatons of CO2 pollution in the atmosphere that need to be removed proactively beyond net zeroing the economy, which is 40 gigatons. So if you think net zeroing the economy is a big problem, think about the 800 gigatons that are already in the atmosphere and will be there for a very long time unless we proactively pull them out. But what inspired you to create Mokocono, and what is your hope for its long-term existence?
I was inspired to create Mokocono due to my direct involvement in the clean energy sector and seeing how numerous corporations perform a lot of greenwashing tactics as it relates to marketing practices and advertent but also inadvertent ways of communicating to the public, not just companies, but also governmental institutions and organizations that have a specific product, specific intentions to inject into the market, but aren't doing it in the most sustainable or equitable way because of my involvement with numerous environmental justice focused initiatives, and really seeing the impact that communities of color and marginalized communities face because they're the forefront of climate change impacts, it inspired me to really found an organization focused on disrupting the ESG markets in a positive way, transforming it into something that is sustainable, but also something that combines community perspectives. I see that one of rooms of improvement for corporations who, carry out ESG initiatives is that a lot of the strategy behind injecting into the ESG sphere is done in-house, is done between select group of executives who, have been in the private sector for a very long time and are financially benefiting from it. And not that they're not considering voices of people who are facing the impacts of climate change in different ways, but there's not enough focus on the marginalized communities. And I would like to bridge that gap with Mokocono, be able to really use the fundamentals of environmental justice, representative justice, distributive justice, procedural justice, in particular representative justice, allowing corporations to be in contact with communities who would not have otherwise had the platform to speak with corporations, and not acting as an ally, but acting as a driving force behind the voices of communities that are being impacted. I see in my professional life, but also also academically, many focuses for environmental studies, electrification, energy efficiency. The focus is on communities who can afford to do so, communities that are more powerful and more influential in society. And Mokocono seeks to disrupt these this ESG market into something more positive and something more transformative in order for net zero carbon technologies and the future of the net zero carbon economy to have voices from marginalized communities featured. And eventually, I see Mokocono as a leading, due to my interest in solar and my continued research and initiatives for the solar industry, be a leading solar developing company focused on equitable energy systems for all. That's how I see Mokocono as a company.
I love the vision. And, I guess if I were an executive at, just say, a large manufacturer, for example, a company that makes steel. Steel is one of our most prevalent and important materials, but it is also one of a select few very polluting materials in terms of its carbon footprint. And so we're in a predicament. We humans have invented a world that is so dependent on processes that result in burning fossil fuels. And so when you think about a transcendent ESG framework by mainstream companies that is more true to the principles of environmental justice, what do you say to those leaders? And it could be current leaders and future leaders. I'm sensitive to your phraseology of disruption, and that somehow means a transformation, which we clearly desperately need. We need to transform our economy to one that doesn't borrow from future generations the way it is. So, in layman's terms, though, McKenna, what do you say to these executives? On some level, they're beholden by the principles of capitalism that require them to focus and generating a profit and creating externalities, right, like air pollution. So we don't pay the full price of steel cups because the company that made the steel is allowed to just use the sky as a dump, for example. And as a result, I have a cheap coffee cup, and I appreciate that because I want to be able to afford a nice steel cup as opposed to a plastic cup. But it's a bit of a bind. It's a bit of a conundrum. So I'm just curious how you think about this and what you say to corporate leaders.
I think the main thing I would tell corporate leaders in the ESG markets with their technologies and their developments is that your goals as a company are directly tied to the needs of residents across the nation, but also the fundamental needs of the environment and Mother Nature, to be holistic in and of itself. In the future of the net zero carbon economy, especially with all the disasters we see unfolding before our eyes as it relates to fires and droughts, widespread flooding, especially in the Hampton Roads region, of which large cohort of African Americans reside in. We see the conversations about energy in Ukraine, and with the predicament happening there, the cultural genocide happening with Ukraine and Russia across the globe. We see what Americans are paying at the pump. There's so many conversations surrounding climate change. And the thing that I would tell these executives is that you have to reformulate your business plan to be more akin to the needs of the community and of environmental justice frameworks. Because if you do not, you will not thrive as a company, and you will be left behind while your competitors will take your place. That's what I would tell them.
So one of the things that you and I spoke about in our first meeting was bringing future generations of people into the energy transition. What is your experience working with young people on college campus or campuses and other schools? How well received is the energy transition? And because I lose sleep at night about this, we need tens and hundreds of thousands of more people to be really focused on the energy transition and a net zero economy, all things related to that. But what is your experience, and what do you say to young people who might be listening to this?
I would say there's room for everyone in the youth arena for involving yourself in climate change mitigation, in the environmental sphere, natural conservation. I would like to take this question two ways. First, to address the importance of having youth involved in leadership conversations for the transformation of our modern world, but also, on the other hand, talk about the ways in youth, how youth can be involved right now in their present circumstances, whether they be in middle school, high school, or college. And I also would like to briefly touch on the conversations I've had with different Gen Z and other youth, just from college, from the organizations that I've hosted in the program that we have done, and in general. To first start off, I would like to bring up my investigations last summer, in summer 2021. My college partner, colleague, India Woodfolk, she is a graduating senior at University of Richmond studying anthropology and environmental studies. She and I won $10,000 from Davis Projects for Peace to carry out solar development and renewable energy education program in Hampton Roads, Virginia, specifically in the community of Portsmouth, Virginia. We carried out 35 home assessments and energy audits, but we also use that money to develop and host a 3-week youth program focused on renewable energy education and energy education and sustainable development. We called it RESD. And from that, we realized that, out of the 12 students who were part of our summer cohort, we provided them stipends and connecting with counselors and consultants who were actually interns and fellows from EJI and the director of sustainability at University of Richmond. We learned that they want to be involved in the climate change mitigation sphere, but they don't really know how to, because there aren't a lot of opportunities beyond, basic internships. And that's a whole other conversation internships pose on marginalized communities and unpaid internships, but they don't know where to start. And I think that really begins in the classroom from a young age in elementary school, having conversations about climate change specifically, not just about environmental processes, but the way and how young children can be involved in the climate mitigation sphere, how them just starting simple conversations with their parents and their community members and learning about more energy efficient practices and sustainable practices from at an early age, how that can blossom into a flower that, metaphorically blooms when they're older, when they start considering college or trade school or different paths of life. And no matter what area you end up in later in life, that can directly be tied into improving our circumstances in your own community or at the community at large. So in young children, most of them were early high school. We had 12, one in middle school, most in high school, and 1 or 2 in college. Most of them said that they were scared about the future. They had what we call eco-anxiety, fear about circumstances in the future, how they see the world physically, and how other people around them consider the world. And one of the ways that we try to motivate them is equipping them with tools and resources on how to lessen that anxiety and really connect with the topics that they're passionate about, as it relates to the environmental studies, education sphere as a whole, while also getting them in touch with nature by performing meditations with the director of sustainability, going on field nature walks, and learning about different native species of plants and whatnot. So not everything has to tie into energy and activism at a young age. It can be more holistic. It can be more about considering a relationship of yourself with the natural world around you. And that really starts, mental conversations within these children about the way that they can be involved. And so from young children, I would shift to more college age students and beyond, and just urge college students to reach out to the communities that they're part of. If it's just your school community, reach out to your offices of sustainability or environmental club and see what initiatives that they have going on. You might be wondering how would the director respond to an email, or I don't know how to phrase this. That should be of less concern rather than you just placing yourself in a position and in an organization or in a community that can have incremental change over time. I think it's really important that you put yourself out there, even if you're scared, because you're your own biggest advocate. And if you don't start that conversation, you never know what may come of it. I was always told nothing beats a failure but a try. And I really do think that community and relationship building is at the forefront of true sustainable and equitable change for our world. And that conversation can be catapulted by you. And from that conversation, many other positive things can come out of that. And that's really how I started out in the environmental justice and renewable energy sector, from starting a conversation by sending 6 emails to my present mentor. And after the 6 email, over a span of 3 months, she responded and, allowed me to come into her world of environmental justice, connect me with organizations like Bridging the Gap and Concerned Citizens of Charles City County, which landed me a plethora of experience and education and thought-provoking conversations and opportunities for the future. And if I had not sent that email, I would not be where I am today. So I would say, more than anything, believe in yourself and be your best friend and be your biggest advocate. Because just like you need to be your biggest advocate, Earth needs you to be an advocate for the nation as a whole and the world as a whole. And that really just starts with one conversation.
Very well said. I would like our listeners to know that they can find all of this content at cleanpower.group/podcast. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit that bell so you get notifications. Give us a rating and review on Apple and Spotify. That is the best way you can help others find this content. And with that, how can our listeners find you, McKenna?
The listeners of this podcast episode can find me on LinkedIn if you search McKenna Dunbar, or you can contact me at Mokocono, MOCOKONO @gmail.com, or contact me at my work email, mckenna.dunbar@sierraclub.org.
Thank you so much, McKenna Dunbar of the Sierra Club, the Ecological Justice Initiative, and Mokocono. It's truly a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.